Hey there, this is Rich, and I am with my good friends Matt and John, who I haven't seen in a minute. Well, I've seen them, just not on like a computer screen doing a podcast. Welcome to Above Board with Candor Path, and we finally have the full team. We are ready. We are just psyched to be here. How are you two gentlemen? And I use that term very loosely. How are you doing?
Good to Rich B. I'm glad to be back with you, buddy. I feel like we've taken like a hiatus from the three of us, but John, being the number three achiever that he is in the Enneagram test, it is number three, right, John?
It is number three. We just
Okay.
learned about this, by the way.
Yeah. So John, being the number three he is, took our podcast, threw it on his shoulders. I know Richie went a few solos. He had some amazing guests in our absence, but it's been a minute. I missed you
Well,
guys.
that's what happens when you don't have a boat. You tend to work a lot. So that was not a dig at Matt in any way whatsoever, because Matt does work extremely hard. So yeah, no, it's great to be back with you all, and I hope we can do this more often. A lot of that is my schedule. I've been in everywhere from New Mexico to Illinois to New Hampshire to Hawaii. I'm going to California and Kentucky this week. So I'm everywhere. I'm in more places than Willie Nelson. I don't know. Does he know
How
how to
those
play?
frequent flyer miles? You getting some upgrades? I mean, that's a
I
lot of
don't get
miles,
upgrades
buddy.
anymore. No, I missed. I was
Ooh.
diamond on Delta for probably the last 8, 9 years, and I took my eye off the ball last year, and I was flying another airline a little bit because they had some
Ooh.
direct flights. And had I paid better attention, I would have noticed that I only needed like 2 or 3 more flights to hit diamond, and I blew it off. I was so busy, I just didn't pay attention. And so now I'm platinum. And while that sounds very impressive, it sucks. I haven't gotten upgraded one time this year,
Oh
and
gosh, the
it's annoying.
horror.
Well, it is. It's when you travel as much as I do, it's
Yeah,
the little things.
the
It's
little
the
things,
extra
sure.
bag of peanuts and the more comfortable seat and the occasional upgrade where I can actually get a meal. But
Mm.
anyway, so I'm whining about first world problems. Poor me,
How's
I'm
the how's
whining.
the people watching at the airport looking these days? Is that still
Um,
fun?
People are crazy. I mean, just people are just out of their minds, and it's kind of funny. I have so many stories, and whenever I post any stories of things that happen, I always get some idiot that goes on social media because there's people that have nothing better to do than to attack people on social media. Oh, this sounds like a made up story, and I always look at their picture or their page, and it's like usually a cartoon picture with no content and like 3 followers. I'm like, you're a made up person. So it's just kind of silly. But yeah, no, there's all sorts of shenanigans going on. I had a guy was screaming at somebody on a flight recently because they put their backpack in the overhead bin instead of their suitcase, which yes, you are supposed to put your suitcase in the overhead bin and put your backpack underneath your seat. But there's a way to ask people rather than, hey, idiot, why is your backpack up here? Don't you know how to listen? Like that's always a great way to start a negotiation.
That's how Matt communicates with me a lot.
Is
So
it
we
not the
learned that
way?
we learned that this whole Enneagram thing, which I'm curious if you know what yours is, Rich, but
I
he's an
forgot.
8, which is a challenger.
I
And
forgot. Yeah.
Matt doesn't actually communicate that way, but
I
he's
did those years ago, and I don't.
Happened.
There was the one where we did the color wheel, and everyone's like, "Oh, are you blue? Are you?" I don't remember because it's kind of to me, no offense to the people that created them. I believe that they're horoscopes because I just think you can literally plug. If somebody goes, "Are
You
you're very are you in a grumpy mood today?" Yeah. Are you a Gemini? Yeah. Oh my God, that's so typical of Gemini. I go, no, it's so typical of a human being. So I don't know. I don't believe that those things are
you
super
also don't believe in
accurate.
work-life balance.
There's no such thing. I'll
we can the challenger's about to come. Number eight, here I come, big guys. Here's what's important, Rich, is
yes,
not the number.
it's
It's the
not
conversation that comes from the number and the
right.
conversation that is created from having at least something that you're like, oh, I think that's me. And then you just have someone that's like, oh, that's him. And then you like have this amazing conversation. That's what I got out of it, less the number. I've also used the number as a crutch since I've known my number. So I'm like, I'm a complete jerk sometimes. And they're like, oh, I'm like, I'm a number eight. I have to be like, that's what I am. And
Much like
I'm
much
working on
like
becoming.
much like a horoscope. Oh, I'm sorry that I was so moody. I'm a Gemini. So yeah, it's I think they're great as conversation starters.
Sure.
I've seen so many people use them as a crutch. I remember the one that we used to use where it was color, and the boss that we had that ran the company at the time was all red, which was all like, to the point, get things done, all that kind of stuff. But then he also needed a lot of ego stroking and to be told he's doing a great job and he needed connection with people, which was all the other colors. But he just played the red part for when he wanted to be kind of obnoxious and go off on people. And he'd say, just please understand I'm red. And I'm like, no, you're just using that as a reason to be an idiot. But no, I'm sure they're very good. I'm sure they have their place, just like horoscopes have their place, and reading tea leaves and looking at the clouds and deciding what God is telling you from up above. But
Oh
no,
my
I'm just
goodness.
kidding. Of course, they're great. They're great. I don't remember what mine is. I really don't. I should probably take the test again. I'm sure John will administer the test to me right after the podcast is complete.
It's a short 144 questions, and you can have it done in as little as 2.5 hours. So we will carve out the rest of the day.
Or 20 minutes. Some of us got it done in
I
like
did it
10
in
out of
20
20.
minutes.
I remember years ago we were doing, for one job that I had, they had this company that did this and they had all these questions. And I'm not lying to you because I actually wrote it down. It's in a diary somewhere. I have to find the actual question, but it was literally a question that said, have you ever fantasized about causing harm to a coworker? And I thought, no
Oh,
one's going to
daily.
ever answer that question
Oh,
on it. Like, really, you're going to say yes to that question if you've ever thought about it. So I just kind of feel like, yeah, some of them were a little silly, but I
I've
answered
dreamed
no to
about
that question.
choking John. I mean, that's is that not natural?
But I mean, you don't have to be
Sorry,
his,
buddy.
you don't
And
have to be his,
what?
you don't have to be his coworker to fantasize about that.
I
That's
have
true.
several follow-up questions to understand what kind of dream that was, but anyway, well, that's a different podcast for a different day.
JK.
Okay, so today I think we're gonna, because we started off, because we are all so childlike and so childish ourselves. The three of us are parents of different age children. I am the older of the group. I think I'm, if you add John and Matt's age together, that's my age. I have a 23-year-old, I have an almost 14-year-old, and an almost 9-year-old. So let's just call it 23, 14, and 9. Uh, John, your kids' ages are
3 and 6.
3 and 6. Matt?
7 and 10.
So we've got some variety there. Matt and I are a little bit closer with your oldest and my youngest. You all are money experts and really good at what you do. A lot of people start off life messed up when it comes to money. They just do. Okay, it's the typical, and I'm sorry, it's so old hat, but it's the typical, I was raised that, very religious family and the money was the root of all evil, or I was raised to believe that anybody that's rich is takes advantage of the poor guy, or I was raised to believe that I don't know anything about money. I was bad at math. I was raised to believe that I'm penny wise and pound foolish. We all know blame our poor parents for everything, but a lot of our habits in life start at an early age. A lot of our habits do. If you were in a household where everybody ate really bad and smoked and drank, then it's very likely, according to science, that you probably are going to not eat well and smoke and drink. If you grew up in a household where, conversation was very important, or faith was very important, or, education was very important, then that, also became part of your life. So I think money is one of those things that really we're molded very early on with money. So a lot of, when you're managing people's money, you're sometimes dealing with how they were raised, whether you realize it or not. If you have a 65-year-old coming to you and they're talking to you about investments, I'm sure you're hearing some of what they were brought up. Well, what is that? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Isn't that
Mhm.
kind of the whole premise of that book? If I remember, I read
Yeah.
it. And my book would have been Poor Dad, Middle Class Dad. But that the whole premise of that book was the examples of how you're raised and
Yeah,
your
and Rich,
parents.
remember, we have a very unique perspective, John and I, because we have roughly 200 clients, let's just say. So we get to see on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis 200 different ways, and we go deep with our clients. Right? We see what's happening underneath the hood, not just what they're projecting outward, but we are able to get in those meetings, really to the root of what their money philosophy is, and we get to see 200 very unique perspectives, and from that we can see what works and what doesn't. What has worked, who are the ones that are successful, who are the ones that are working on becoming successful, and what are the traits between those. And there's no right or wrong, and I think everything we're going to talk about here on today's podcast, there's no right or wrong, and we're going to bring up some specific examples, and if you say that's me, that's not a bad thing. We're taking it from the viewpoint of what we've seen that works best and what we've seen that doesn't work. So there's a handful of examples here that I'm going to at least talk about where I've tried things that utterly failed when it came to money and our children. So I think just want to preface by saying we're going to bring some perspective to it and talk about what we've seen works and what we've seen does not work.
I love that. Let's start off with, if I could, let's start off with maybe a couple. We don't have to have a number. I mean, and, everybody always starts with the top three or the top 10, but start off with what you all think are some of the maybe best or worst money habits that are instilled in young people or children right away. And then feel free, we can also talk about examples of our own kids and what we've seen. But what do you think are some of the things that parents do, whether they realize it or not, that set up their kids either for success or failure when it comes to how they think about money? And if you want, I mean, I'm the least money person of the three of us. I can go first, or if something jumps out at you two, lead with that.
I can go first. My kids are the youngest, so I can maybe start at these like very formative years. Something that I've learned, especially being a father to a daughter, you want to give your child everything. And a mistake that I've made over time, I think a lot of parents tend to do this, maybe especially dads, it's like they want that toy, they want that thing, and you just give them the instant gratification of like, yeah, sure, we can get that. And so over time, my fear has been cultivating a habit of wanting possessions or things as opposed to experiences with my daughter. So it's like, oh, we'll go to Target, but like we only go to Target if we get a toy. That's kind of like those are some of the rules that I think we're working on breaking. And this has nothing to do so much with money, but it's if it's the habits that they see us do. So if we're just buying them the things that they want all the time, and not giving them a sense of or having the conversation of like this, this is something we have to work towards or we have to earn. And it doesn't have to be monetary yet, especially at young ages. Something I've done with both of my kids, even my son now, is this concept of delayed gratification. So, trying to think of a good example I've done recently. Like Ella goes, "Hey, I'd like a piece of candy." She gets home from school, can I have a piece of candy? Well, I don't have a reason to say specifically no if she's eating dinner or whatever that type of, but I'll say, okay, well, you can have one piece of candy now, or you can have two pieces of candy in 20 minutes if you wait. And we set the timer. And I learned this from I don't know, some other podcast I listened to, but kind of like creating this sense of like working towards or earning something. And money's that way.
Mhm.
We'd be foolish to assume if we can have all the things we want now with the money that we earn to the degree in which we can, spend as much as we've earned. And most Americans spend more than they earn. That's a huge problem in America. Or we can put money away and we can save, and we do that for decades.
Right.
Like we're saving now for when we're in our 60s and 70s. That's years, years and years away. So how do you start developing that habit or learning that trait? I don't think it's innate in anybody. Everybody wants instant gratification for everything. So even at a young age, maybe kind of doing some things to focus on creating a sense of delayed gratification. That's just like a minor example for
And
me.
I tried that too, John, and it did work. And my first point, and I think I'll kind of piggyback on yours, was where I failed. Like, so let's talk about what didn't work. And the traditional piggy bank, right, is sort of maybe where you're going with that, John, is being able to have a task list or a chore list, and then be able to take that dollar bill or $5 bill or $10 bill at the end of the week or month or whatever it is, put it in that piggy bank, watch that money grow and do it. So, but it's 2023, right? I don't carry much cash in my wallet these days, right? It's an electronic world. So I moved away. My boys all have chores, unloading dishwasher and helping out with our family pet. We have 5 or 6 things everyone's got to do. And I was like, boys, daddy doesn't have a 5 spot, so I'm gonna put it in your savings account. And they're like, oh, great. And what I started to realize is that while I'm looking at that balance, because of course I have the login to all of our banking information, they had no clue. And the motivation they're not motivated by money, but still, if they're gonna say, "Hey, I'll unload the dishwasher after a long day at school," they would say, "Hey, I finished my chore chart for the week. I'd love to have my allowance." I moved away and said, "Hey, I got it. I'm just going to sweep over money from our checking account to your savings." They have no way to see that, and the motivation started to move away, or they started questioning, "Hey, what is my balance and what's going on here?" And they were too young to do that. I know, Rich, you have a different perspective of it as your second oldest now only uses electronic forms of money, but with the young ones, I still think, and this is where I failed, was I was doing it the most efficient way I thought possible, and it's not. They still needed to see that tangible, that piece of candy, as John mentioned, maybe for Hudson or for Ella, and the boys wanted to see some cash just because that's now tangible, and they can have that deferred gratification. But there was the reward they never ended up seeing. They
Right.
needed to see that reward, and I know it'll move towards the electronic and more efficient way of doing it, but I started that too early. I made a mistake, and now I'm going back and doing my best to correct it and have to go to the bank and
Well,
get fives and ones
right.
and
Well,
all of these things.
it's kind of like, at a kid's birthday party, at a certain age, when, you have that random aunt or uncle that gives your 4 or 5 or 6-year-old even a gift card. You can always see they open the card. You go, read the card, Ella. Happy birthday, Ella. Hope this is a very special. And then they have a card and they nod and they put it down. They have no concept. It says a number on it that they may or may not understand. But then if I went to the dollar store and bought Ella a silly little toy and some candy that was worth $7 compared to the $50 that the aunt gave, they're more excited about that because that becomes real and tangible. By the way, money experts, do you know why it's called a piggy bank? I bet you don't. You don't? I can't wait to tell you
No.
this.
No
So,
idea.
so originally back in the day, there was a cheap type of clay called pig, Pygg, and so people would make clay jars out of this cheap, sort of inexpensive, affordable kind of clay. And if they had extra coins, they would throw it in the pig jar or the pig bank, which then started to become referred to as the piggy bank. Which then, of course, they started to actually just create them in the shapes of pigs. So that's where piggy bank came from,
I did not
Pygg.
know that.
Yeah,
Thank
see,
you,
that's an
Rich.
important thing. I'm surprised that they didn't teach you that when you went to, like,
Not at finance
CPA
school.
school. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
finance school,
that
they
would be
don't
an
tell us that.
important thing to know, just saying. So, yeah, there is I just, we have to educate our listeners, and if they don't learn something tangible, they can literally, we're gonna go deep into stuff, and someone's gonna go, "I listened to this podcast today. Do you know why they call it a piggy bank?" And literally, it's gonna go viral just because of that. But
We can only
anyway,
hope.
that's what I
So
do.
where was that crossover
Mhm,
for Luke,
mhm,
Rich, on going from tangible, I did a task, I got a reward, to
mhm.
now it's in an account. What was that transition like? Because did you end up, and maybe this happened with Rhett too, but did you transition over from dollar bills to electronic, or was it just a factor of time?
Yes, no, if I remember correctly, so he's in 8th grade right now. I'm gonna say it happened in or around, he's sort of on the mature side, 5th or 6th grade. And what we did was is we got him, we bank at a bank, and this particular bank has a special account that's set up for kids, and they have a debit card that it's connected to the adult's account. So our account's connected to it. We can move money in and out of it. For our listeners, they may or may not know this. So Luke is a unique situation. Luke has worked as a actor that does commercials and modeling since he was about 8 or 9 or 10. So he's made sometimes thousands and thousands of dollars for a given commercial, and that helped us because, let's say hypothetically, he makes $10,000 for doing a Disney commercial. Way back in the day, before I knew how much money he was going to make, I said, hey, whatever you make, you get 20% of, and the rest goes into your college account. So that's $10,000, and I'm like, I can't give you this money in your hand.
Oops.
And he was very mature. So I sat down with him. I said, hey, buddy, you understand I can't give you $2,000. And he's like, no, I totally understand. I said, how about we'll do 20% up to 200? That's reasonable. And he said, absolutely. So he does this commercial. We would show him, we opened this account. Well, he has a college account. So we would show him what would go in the college account. And it didn't make sense to hand him $200 bills or $20 bills or whatever. So we created this debit account where he could see the number. So he would log on, he'd see how much he has. So if we go out somewhere and he wants to buy something that is not covered by mom and dad, we're, we're like, what do you want to do? So here's the cool part. First of all, it was right around that age. And to John's point, it's kind of like the candy piece. So it's like the more mature version of that. So let's say Luke has $500 in his account, right? So he sees a pair of Air Jordans that he really wants. He's like, man, look at these Air Jordans. They're light blue. They're really rare. They're on, this particular website. How much are they, Luke? They're $250. Wow, that's a lot for sneakers. What do you think? He's like, I don't know. What do you think? I'm like, well, do you want to buy them? And then he'll look at me when he was younger and he'll go, oh, I have to buy them? I'm like, oh yeah, no. So if you buy them, then you'll have 250 in your account. 9 times out of 10. He's like, no, I'm good. I don't want to do that. Ava, who's 9, also has an account. And when she first opened it up, she didn't understand it. Now she definitely understands it. She's even tighter and cheaper than Luke is with her money. Like she doesn't want to spend anything. I think for us, what we learned, because we had the 5-year age difference between the two of them, out of convenience, we opened the account for Ava at the same time that we opened the account for Luke. So much like this generation is very used to phones and getting on phones, and you have adults that are 30, 40, 50 years old who go to their 9, 10-year-old and say, how do I update this, or how do I upload this? Ava is very comfortable with online and doesn't want money. So at 8, 9 years old, if she does something well, or if, Grammy gives her, $5 for getting an A on her report card, when she gets the $5 bill, she literally, thank you, she's very appreciative, and she will hand it to my wife. And it's the unspoken, here's $5, you do whatever it is that you want to do with it, but put that in my account. So that's kind of, I think it's where you start them from and what their maturity level is. They also really get a kick out of having the card. When Luke teaches karate, which is where, Matt's son goes, sometimes him and some of the older kids will walk right through the parking lot and go to McDonald's, and we'll see the thing flash up on we'll get an alert and say, X amount of dollars were just spent at McDonald's. He loves that feeling of being able to do that. And it's sort of a safety net for him too. So I think it's where you start them and what their maturity level is.
So let's talk about that, where you start them. When do you start talking to your kids about money? The reason why this came up is because I got asked 2 days ago at dinner, Dad, how much money do you make?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from Bryce, who's 10, and how do I answer that? Now we've talked about this before also on the podcast, like a surgeon who sees blood and does not freak out, or actually I should have said, as a nurse, like a nurse who sees blood and does not freak out. When it comes to money, and I think I'll probably speak on behalf of John as well, I'm very open about money because I deal with it all day long. And if I saw someone's arm falling off like you would, Rich, you would go into, okay, step 1 is I have to suture them up and stop the bleeding and do this. I see it and I would pass out and faint. And then when it comes to seeing, millions of dollars that John and I handle on a daily basis, that's, for us, we take it extremely seriously. But for us, it's a number on a piece of paper at times. And for us, we don't get moved by the number. So I'm prefacing with this, but I'm very open about money. But I got asked that question, and I said, I'm an expert in this area. How do I answer this? And I want to know, when did you guys? I'll share my story when we're done. But how do you guys talk to? And again, Ella and Hudson might be a little bit young, but I know you probably had these conversations with at least Ella, John, and of course you have as well, Rich. But how do you talk to your kids about money and some of these questions that just naturally come up? How much money do we have? Or what did our house cost? Or how much money do you make? How do you guys handle those questions? Last bit, and then I'll let you guys talk, is we've seen clients who say nothing, and we have clients, and I've experienced people who tell them everything.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your philosophy on both of those?
I will let Rich answer that question because I don't think I've crossed the threshold where my kids are old enough to ask that question. What's interesting for me is the tangible aspect of money seems to be more valuable to them at the moment, especially my oldest, where she could have 5 $1 bills and that has a perceived value greater than one $20 bill. And she's, in this year, she's learning that that's not the case anymore. But especially with the Tooth Fairy giving her money, something that we talk a lot about is, and I actually wrote an article about this years ago. The first published article I ever did was called Making Sense for Your Children's Future, CENTS. So a good play on words there.
You witty dog.
And
I love it.
And it was this aspect of teaching your kids. Obviously, you want to teach them the value of money, but really it was once you get it, then what do we do with it? So we have three different buckets. We have a give it, a save it, and a spend it. And allowing within reason, allowing, let's say, my oldest, and work in progress with my youngest. I mean, he's only 3, but how much should be in each bucket, and
Mhm.
the give one's kind of fun for me because it's my daughter's kind of like a number one. She's sort of a natural born people pleaser, which has its positive attributes for sure, and she's just a sweet kid, and so she'll get like let's say she's got whatever, I don't know, $50 in her piggy bank. We'll have this conversation, and she'll want to take some of that money and go buy a toy for a friend. Like Ryland's birthday just happened. She wanted to use that money to buy his birthday gift, and I love that, conditioning and maybe sort of cultivating that, like flaming that fire a little bit. I think that's really sweet. And obviously, the idea of save it, we all get that. And then also, I think this kind of goes back to Rich, what you were talking about with Luke, where doing some of these gigs that he has, and then having these dollars, and understanding like we're gonna save some of this, we're gonna give some of this, and you can spend, like, you can enjoy this too. That's okay. That's okay to
Mhm.
enjoy it. I don't know that I have a good answer, Matt, to your question. I'll let Rich answer it, but those are some of the things that came up for me.
And you were asking specifically, Matt, do you want to know specifically, like, how do you handle the how much do you make question, or just how you talk about
Yeah.
money in general?
Yeah, and
So,
I think they're kind of combined together.
yeah,
Mine stem from, "Daddy, how much money do you make?" And how do I answer that so that I can be truthful and honest with my son, who I'm at the point where I can be,
mhm.
but not tell him something that might
Yeah.
be shared with someone who it should not be shared with.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like I handle that question maybe, and I'm old school. I never knew. I remember when my parents were filling out my college applications, when I was in 1985, and I wasn't allowed to see the page where my dad wrote down how much he made, which of course I saw the page of how much my dad made, and I looked at it and was impressed because he didn't make that much, and yet we lived a pretty comfortable middle class life. And so I guess I was molded by a generation, and I always forget what the generation before the boomers is called. I think it's the greatest generation. I'm not sure, but my parents were born in 1930, so whatever that generation would be. It was a very private thing. So I handle it with just the same way that if somebody asked me, any other personal question, So um, I say when I've been asked that question, and I have been by my kids, I say, money is something that is sort of private, and you don't want to brag about how much money you make. And you also don't want people to know, because people can make certain assumptions about you, or it's just something that you keep private to yourself. And it's okay not to share that. Daddy makes enough money so that we're able to live in this house. We're able to go to the school that we go to. We're able to go on vacations. So daddy does very well. I work really super hard, but you don't usually, that's not something that I really share out there in public. It's something that's kind of kept a little bit private. And so that's how I handle it. There may be parents that say I make $140,000, or I make $75,000 a year, but I don't, because um, if you know one thing about kids, it's if you say something in the house, they're going to say it outside of the house. So if you don't want your kid's teacher, the principal, the crossing guard, the school bus driver, and the babysitter to know how much you make, then I don't share that with young kids. So that's just me, and there may be people that have
Yeah,
tremendous
I agree.
reasons to disagree with that. But I
I
just
agree
feel
with
like
that.
it's a conversation also, and there's things that we share with other people, and there's things that we don't. So it broadens into a different kind of conversation. Um, the other thing is, early on with that conversation is, and it's funny, John, because I just wrote down before you said the give, save, spend, there's something that I've been doing for my kids because they're very fortunate. They both work. Ava also does commercials and sometimes makes a lot of money. So they've got a college fund, they've got a car fund. So they see that money. I'm very, very big on how we give it away. So for example, two examples. One is we go to church. Not everybody goes to church, so that, you don't have to. What I do is we have an envelope, we're old school. So we have the envelope and we write the check. I put the dollar amount right on and I show it to them. This is how much we give in the envelope. I do this thing, and it's kind of a little trick, but I'll put $20 in fives in my wallet. That's all I have. So I'll have four $5 bills. When we go to church, I'll open my wallet in front of my kids. I hand the envelope to Dawn, and then I take all the money that I have in my wallet and I give the two fives to Luke and two fives to Ava. And what I'm showing them is charity. And Luke said, that's all the money you have. And I go, right, but right now they're giving to the farming ministry, or they're giving to this couple in India who are helping sick children in India, or this is for, the people that do surgery on cleft lip or cleft palate. So yeah, no, I'm giving everything I have in my wallet. And what I'm trying to instill in my kids is that money is a great thing, but that money is also a way to serve others. At the end of the day, when you read everything, when you talk about burnout, when you talk about people that are depressed, it keeps coming back to service of others. So it is a setup, because I purposely I didn't put $100 in my wallet, but it's to show them so that growing up, they're getting instilled in their mind, wow, dad would go to church and he would give everything that was in his wallet to charity, because I want them to kind of understand that. So we have a lot of conversations about that money flows through you. It's meant to be moved. It's meant to go and serve people. Luke had to pay taxes last year. Okay. So, and so did Ava. So when we sat down and talked about that, I explained to him what taxes do, because we can all joke around and get mad at taxes. But, I said, the military, the police department, the fire department. And I just went through all the things that taxes fund. And I said, nobody wants to give away money, but we're sometimes this is going to good things. And then we talked about being responsible with it. But I love this whole idea, because I'm very big on give, save, and spend. It's what I just expressed. You get $200 out of your $3,000 that you made. A bunch of it's going to go in your bank account, but hey, this is what's going on at your school, where they're buying school supplies for an underprivileged elementary school that's not that far from us. How much do you want to give, Luke? Because I'm giving 100. How much do you want to give? And he'll go, oh, can I take, $25? Yeah, absolutely. Ava, how much do you want to give? And she's usually like 5. So, but I think that's super important, because I was raised, real quick, you know, not that way. And I think it's because my parents were so poor growing up. I remember when I gave to a charity one time in my mom's name for Christmas. Have you guys ever heard of that charity where you can buy like a pig, or you can buy like a cow, or you can do that for, or a well,
Overseas.
You can adopt a
Yeah.
llama.
Yeah.
yeah. So my mom got so mad, and she said, they're probably giving a bag of sand to these people and you're putting all this money, but it wasn't. It was on Charity Navigator. It was very well. But for me, I was not raised to be charitable. It was like, whatever you get, you hold on to. So I think those are valuable lessons that you give to your kids early on.
Well, that's also on them. If that charity is doing nefarious things with the money that you give, it's still on your heart to give and do the right thing for whatever that situation that you felt called to do.
And that's a
I
good
think
question, because
something that's
what do you guys do when you're at a red light and there's a person standing there that says, out of work, and your kids, because we all have sweet kids, but speaking about your kids, the kindest, sweetest kids in the world, they're just so sweet and gentle. Um, Especially Ella, who's old enough to read the sign, et cetera, and your boys who are just so kind. What do you do when they say, Daddy, that man is on the side of the road and he doesn't have any food, can we give him some money? What do you do?
Yeah, well, I've gotten nicer over the years. I think my children have blessed me with a little more grace than I used to have. So in those situations, back then, I'd lock the windows and lock the doors. And I do give now in those situations, because I think it's a fun exercise. It ends up being a really nice conversation, and you feel good because you helped somebody too. So it's kind of a win all the way around. It's actually interesting you say that, because now recently so a lot of times I just try to do these like random acts of kindness that within our company we call them RAKs, RAK, random acts of kindness. And if I'm in a drive through, I'll pay for the person ahead of us or behind us or whatever. Well, so now like it's kind of the point where my daughter's like, are you going to pay for that like it's become the expectation. I'm like, okay, like I'm not feeling it on my heart today to give. Okay. Just give me a break. But so it's become that expectation, which is kind of fun. And I do want to share a funny story about church, because you were talking about it. We went to Ava's first communion, which that was totally not the first time we had been to church in 2023. But so we give to our local church this kind of goes back to Matt's comment, but we give to a local church on a systematic basis. Like it's like an ACH withdrawal that we signed up for, and it just happens on auto. And it's back to this whole point of like making it tangible for your kids. So we give that way, which I guess the implicit idea for me is like, if I give that way, I don't, and then I come to church, I don't have to give in the basket.
Right.
But there's for sure an optics thing of like, oh, you're going to be the person that doesn't give when the basket comes around. But I think giving can be very scalable. So whether you
Absolutely.
make $100,000 or the tooth fairy gave you $5, the next morning, like it's scalable to the situation. So when we went, we talked about the basket that's going to come around, and they both of our kids like went to the piggy bank because they wanted to give money into the basket, which I thought was
Aw.
so sweet. It felt so good. So same as you, like having the kids do that, I think just even that act feels good to do it.
And that's why I
And then
purposely do the old school envelope thing, because I actually Don wanted just to do the automatic thing, and I said, "No, I want the kids to see us doing
yeah,
it so that
the
they understand
lesson
that."
lands more valuably than giving. Like I was trying to convince Ella, I'm like, no, listen, we give, look, I'll show you the receipts, like here's how. And she's
This is
like,
like
I don't.
showing her her bank account, and she's like, "I don't.
Yeah,
These are numbers on a piece of paper. These mean nothing."
So Matt,
yeah,
what about you at
like,
the
I had a
when I
yeah.
decided?
Rich just chatted like, Matt. Let's hear your reaction to this. So, I'm a Enneagram Type 8. If no one knows yet, I don't think we've talked about this yet on our podcast just 20 minutes ago. And by a challenger means someone who is skeptical by nature. So when we pull up to the red light and there is someone with their sign, and um, I I don't have the visceral reaction of rolling up the windows and locking the doors, but I've been asked this before, and I tell my boys, listen, guys, there's a right way to do this and there's a not right way to do this. And in my opinion, standing on the street corner with a sign is not the right way. Um, Further to solidify that is, and you might have read this, there are families that are going around playing violin in shopping centers with families sitting there and with a sign. And so my challenger nature was like what is this all about? My boys are like, why is there like a family there and like with a sign and this guy's playing violin? And I was like, this just does not seem right. Well, lo and behold, it's a known thing of these groups of families. They're not actually playing the violin. It's actually they're pretending like they're doing it, and it's music coming through these speakers, but people are still like paying them, like giving them money. The last point I'll make is that we all end up going to the same church because we live in the same neighborhood and we all live next to each other. And there was a family outside of that church, and the pastor, I remember one day while we were there, said, "Now I know this is going to sound weird, but there's been a family that's been sitting outside the church with the sign requesting donations and money. Would you please help us and not give to them?" And everyone's like, "What's he talking about?" They have a ministry within the church that these people are more than welcome to come, and there's food and there's clothes and there's everything these people need, but they have found that they have made more money by sitting outside the church than by coming and using the resources that are available and doing it through the proper channels. And so because of those things, in my skeptical nature, as I say, boys, there's a right way to do it, a wrong way to do it, and this is not the way that I'll help. And there's some great charities. There's one that one of our clients is a part of. Michael is a part of one called the Sharing Center
Yep.
here locally in Orlando, and there's some really great things that we've participated with. And there's one for women who have domestic abuse and they need things because they're getting out of bad situations. So there's ones that we've kind of really hyper specific targeted that were near and dear to our hearts. But for that, yes, John, I
Well,
do
I
proverbially is it
proverbially.
proverbially?
I don't know. It's not, I don't know. What does your
You
anagram
know what
tell
I
you? You
mean.
should
I
say.
do I do put up the windows and lock them because I don't feel like that's the right way to do it.
I've done some different things, and it depends. It's situational. But one time with Luke when he was a little bit younger, the person at a sign said, "Very hungry. Can you give?" And we were right near a restaurant. I went and bought several sandwiches, some bottles of water, and drove around. And I felt safe, where I was and looking at the person, and I didn't really feel threatened by them. And they didn't look big; they were smaller than me. That's what I'm trying to say. And when I handed him the food, he said, "I really don't need this. Can you just give me money?" And I said, "But your sign says you're hungry." And he said something unkind and walked away. And when I rolled up the window, I shrugged my shoulders and I just kind of put it down anyway. I said, "Here, it's here if you change your mind." And when we got in the car, Luke at like 8 years old or 7 years old goes, "Well, that was a wake up call for me." So it was also a lesson. But then there's been other times that we've done that the folks were like, "Thank you so much." And, everyone says, just like John said, what they do with the money is up to them. But because of the significant substance abuse that's in the homeless population, all those kinds of things, there's a part of you that, do you want to fund that? Do you want to give money to someone that may or may not buy things that might harm themselves or whatever? So that's kind of what I struggle with. So when I do it in real time or in public, it tends to be things that I like, food or bottles of water, or I've bought a bunch of toiletries for somebody and given it to them. And there's been many times that they've accepted it. I think there could be a part 2 to this conversation. I didn't realize we were talking as long. This is one of our longer podcasts, and I just think it's super interesting. I think we should back into this a little bit differently and kind of start with John and talk about how to talk to little kids about money, and then maybe go to you, Matt, and talk about, maybe older kids, and then
I wanted to talk about college, because I
and
think
then
that's
yeah,
part 2 of this is,
I
we've
think
kind
so.
of talked about a little bit of the basics, and we certainly can revisit that. But then, Luke being at his age, the next thing that you're probably going to start facing in the next 4 years is college. So
Yeah,
what's our philosophies and what has worked and what has not that we've
yeah.
seen? I really think there's some cool things we can share
I
about
think
that.
so. And also, to add to that, college, because of my older son, or trade school, because, like my
Sure.
oldest son, who's 23, he went to HVAC, air
Yeah.
conditioning, and he's doing great. So sometimes I want to talk to you guys about, steering families and parents. Should it be a college account? Should it be a different account? Because, I've got a nephew that wants to go to the police academy. I've got another family friend who's got a young daughter who, she wants to, fix cars. She wants to build cars and do body shop stuff. She's like fascinated by that. And people can make an amazing living doing those things. So I absolutely think we should have more of a conversation about money and raising kids and grandkids and all that kind of stuff. And I want to hear more, from the different perspectives. So listen, are you guys good with putting a wrap around this piggy bank? All right, cool. Well, listen, I just want to thank everybody for all of your support. If you would be so kind, please share this podcast with people that you think could get some value from it. If you have the ability to like it or to comment, we would love that. I want to thank you on behalf of John, Matt, and myself for being a listener and being so supportive of this podcast. We are at we're getting very close to 50,000 downloads. We're almost there. Super excited about that. Thank you for joining us on Above Board with Canderpath. We look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, take good care of yourself and keep on putting some money up in that piggy bank. Y'all be good. Thank you.